All right, then. So good afternoon, everyone, and sorry about this. I hope it is being recorded. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear. Yeah,
Okay.
carry on.
Okay, good. So let's begin then. We have done one session again on the 5 wounds of Holy Church by Blessed Rosmini, a most controversial and prophetic book that he wrote. And as you know, the book was condemned after 1 year of being published and put in the index of forbidden books. But then it was held as one of the most beautiful books and the prophetic books by Pope Paul VI and by the bishops at Vatican II Council. They all acclaimed the book, and they took many of the points that Rosmini made in 1832 when he wrote the book, and therefore 100 years later he was there. Now, just quickly, we're going to go to this. We saw this part here. I just want to stop here at this slide for a moment. The 5 wounds of Holy Church. Now, which are they? You see them there. Number 1, the division between people and clergy of worship. We've done that at the previous session, which, by the way, it will be on YouTube. The whole thing will be on YouTube eventually. Then we go to the second wound, which is the...
Don Emilio, lasciamo fare ai domestici il loro. Ma come possono portare i vassoi se riescono a malapena a camminare su 2 gambe? I miei modi.
Lasciano molto a desiderare. È stato un incidente, se non la vede così il problema è solo suo.
Non lasci stare, Tigre. Capisco che come nuova arrivata...
Would you please put off your microphone, the person PB? The person who has got the name PB, please put off your microphone.
Andiamo. E avvicinati.
And another is here. Can you hear any mute?
Yeah, Antonio, now it is clear. Please go on.
Per gli aventi diritto, chiama per informazioni senza impegno. Genesis per il mese in corso illegale, la seconda poltrona.
Antonio, you are being muted. We can't hear you. Antonio, could you please put on...
La messa in piedi assistita, il modello H24 rettilinabile fino a 180 gradi per trasformarsi anche in letto. Cosa aspetti? Chiama Genesis. Questa è una visita gratuita e senza impegno di un consulente. Il mese in corso, seconda poltrona in omaggio, anche di colore e modello diversi, ma sempre in piccole class, la poltrona senza paragoni, l'unica a 3 motori con l'innovativo sistema dorsale che solleva la parte medio alta dello schienale per guardare meglio la televisione o leggere un libro. Su tutte le poltrone la possibilità del
Antonio,
anche con seduta.
Antonio, your microphone is muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you. But could you please ask the person?
Can we have everybody quiet? I mean, there is still noise coming on.
That is a person called PB. You can mute him from there. You can mute the person called PB.
Who is the person talking all the time? If I put mute all, can you hear me? You cannot hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, so perhaps this is the way, yeah? All right, so the insufficient education of the clergy. If you look there, and some of you will recognize Calvario de Modossola, and you see there the shrine of the crucifix and the Jesus on the cross. Now, the first wound is the wound on the left hand, and then the second wound is on the right hand. The third wound, which we shall do later, is the most crucial one because it's the heart of Jesus. It's the wound caused by the spear when they pierced his side. And then the two feet, you got the fourth and the fifth wound. Now we are moving on to we don't said the first wound already. Now we are going to the second wound, which is here. The insufficient education of the clergy, or really the poor formation of a people who are preparing for the diaconate or the priesthood. Now, Rosmini begins this chapter dealing with these wounds by saying that only great people can form great people. This has become a kind of slogan, for all the Rosminians. Only great people can form great people. And the great people were in plenty during the first 6 centuries of the life of the church. And let's go through. Now, Jesus was the great formator. He chose his 12 disciples after a night in prayer, and then he lived with them. He was with them for 3 years, and they heard all his words, they saw his miracles, and so they saw the holiness of his life, and therefore, you see, the disciples learned from him, and then once they learned, they in turn formed great bishops and priests in the various churches in the East and in the West. For example, you got Titus, Timothy, Luke, Mark, were all disciples of St. Paul. Although he was not one of the 12, but St. Paul had direct communication with Jesus on a few occasions, and therefore he was formed by him. And St. Paul then communicated all his holiness and his learning to Titus, who became the bishop of Crete, and then Timothy, who was in Ephesus, and then the great Luke, who was a loyal companion to St. Paul right up to the day of his execution, and a very moving loyalty of Luke to St. Paul. And then we got Mark, the evangelist, and they were all disciples of St. Paul. But then you got St. Irenaeus, who had been a disciple of St. Polycarp, who had been a disciple of St. John, who had been a disciple of Jesus. Just see the connection there. You got Jesus, you got St. John, and then St. John, he instructed St. Polycarp, and St. Polycarp instructed St. Irenaeus. Now, where do we get this from? It's from a writing by St. Irenaeus. St. Irenaeus was of Syrian origin, and he was converted, he became a fervent Christian, and then he was ordained a priest. He was Bishop of Lyon in France, and there he was martyred as well. And he wrote many books. In one of his books, he tells us that I still remember the majestic figure of St. Polycarp, the holy bishop of Smyrna. And St. Polycarp, he says, he was talking to us about the beautiful things which we read at Masses on Sunday. Whatever we have Mass and we read the Gospel, we can hear still, Polycarp speaking to us. Because Polycarp was referring to us all that he had learned from St. John. And St. John naturally was the disciple of Jesus. So there is a strong connection and therefore a strong evidence of that what we read in the Gospels is really real stuff, and that this is historically based, very important witness by Irenaeus. Now, great bishops formed their priests who later became great bishops themselves. Take St. Augustine, for example. His house was the seminary, and therefore he lived with this young man who wanted to become priests, and they could see the holiness of St. Augustine's life. They could hear his intense learning. St. Augustine was an extremely learned man, and if you read the works of St. Augustine, you will see that he wrote a number of books on the Bible and the commentary on the Bible. And so Augustine formed a great number of outstanding priests and bishops, and so did St. Athanasius. St. Athanasius was the bishop of Alexandria in Egypt, and they could learn from him because he 23 times, this poor bishop, had to run away in fear of his life because the emperor wanted him dead. And therefore he was there in Alexandria a few months, and then the emperor would change his mind and want to kill him. And so Athanasius had to run, and usually he went into the desert to hide himself, and there he met St. Anthony of the desert, and St. Anthony protected him, and he was hidden by him. And Athanasius, as you know, he wrote the life of St. Anthony of the desert, first-hand really knowledge of him. St. Ignatius of Antioch, the great saint with his disciples, and then St. John Chrysostom. He was called Chrysostom because his preaching was so superb and beautiful that they nicknamed him Chrysostom, which means the mouth of gold, the golden mouth, St. John Chrysostom. Now, the house of the bishop was a seminary, and he was their teacher by means of words and the example of a holy and learned life. Just notice these two words here, the example of a holy, that is for Blessed Rosmini, that is essential, and then of a learned life, that is, there were people who knew very much and very well. Now, early bishops and priests were very learned in scripture, as I said. You see, the book of the Bible was their textbook. They really learned from the Bible, and all of them, the big bishops of the Old Testament, of the early centuries of the church, all of them wrote commentaries on the Bible because they knew the Bible so well. They could afford to write these beautiful commentaries. St. Jerome, you see him there. Then you St. Augustine, St. Athanasius. Athanasius, he wrote very beautiful words about Christ being the incarnate Son of God. And famous is Athanasian Creed, much longer than the one we say at Mass on Sunday, but beautiful creed. And so Athanasius, another one. Then you got Origen and Tertullian. Their knowledge was the true wisdom, moving their hearts towards loving God and neighbor. They combined learning and holiness. Rosmini never tires to say this. And you know what? Pope Francis, when he spoke to all Catholic university teachers, that was a couple of years ago, he quoted from the 5 wounds of Rosmini. And he quoted precisely the passage where Rosmini speaks about true formation as being a conjunction of holiness of life and the great learning. That is what true formation is. If you are being formed, then you should pursue holiness of life and you should pursue great learning at the same time. What learning? Essentially, Rosmini says, the Bible, the fathers of the church, and all the documents of the church. That is the great learning, that information we should acquire. Now, the Christian communities were also strong in their faith and in their learning. because they were nourished by holy bishops and priests. You know what happened in many parts of the empire during the first 6 centuries of the church. When the Christians, lay normal, usual, ordinary Christians, were going to the public baths, which were meeting places for the Romans, when they went into the bath, the pagans would run away. And you say, why? And the Christians, because the Christians were always involved in very high theological discussions. And these were not priests or bishops, these were ordinary Christians who had learned through listening to sermons and listening to instruction and catechesis. They knew so much about the doctrine of the church and the Bible. They could afford to discuss among themselves topics such, is Jesus truly God and truly man? How many wills are in Jesus? And how many persons are in Jesus? And the procession from the Father and the Holy Spirit, all the difficult, complicated theological points. They were discussing them. And therefore you have that, our parishioners, so to speak, they were really themselves very learned in scriptures and in theological matters. Now, Jesus was at the center of the life of this community of bishops and people in formation. They knew him and they loved him. Now, from such powerful Christian parishes, there came holy and learned vocation. This is a theory of Blessed Rosmini. He says that our priests are weak or strong according to the communities to which they belong. Weak parishes will produce weak priests, who in turn will lead other parishes in a weaker manner. No, by weak, we mean very limited in their knowledge and in their faith. So this is Rosmini's theory, that our vocations, we need to ask them where you come from, which parish, which community. But we can have the same in our communities because, we are at home in our parish perhaps a few years. I mean, I left my parish at the end of 9. When I was 9-year-old, I went to Rovereto, and in the minor seminary in Rovereto, and therefore the community was there in Rovereto. From there, I went to another, to the major seminary in Pusiano near Como, and again, that was my community. And you see, your faith grows stronger as the community is stronger. And so it's so important that any community is totally dedicated to 2 things for Rosmini. Number 1, holiness of life. Number 2, gaining a greater and greater learning, especially of the Bible and of the fathers of the church and of the documents of the church. Why did I put Jerome over there? That's an image of him. Well, because Jerome, as you know, he was an extremely learned man. All his life was based on the Bible. And he went to Bethlehem. And in Bethlehem, he stayed there and he studied the Hebrew language to perfection. He studied the Aramaic language to perfection. And he studied the Greek language. And he translated the whole of the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, into Latin. And therefore we got in the Vulgate Bible, which is practically at the basis of any Bible which is being published today. Now here you got 3 of these bishops and we are talking about. And Sant'Ambrose, amazing man. He was a governor of Milan, and he was a magistrate and one of the most influential people in the Roman Empire, because Milan embraced a very, very large area in those days, and therefore being governor of Milan came second to being the emperor in Rome. And so Ambrose was such a man there in Milan, and he was not even baptized when something important happened to him. He was a catechumen. But then in Milan happened that the bishop died. And therefore the Christians, they got together with the clergy, with their priests, in the great basilica there in Milan. And there they were discussing about who's going to be the next bishop of Milan. No, just notice people in clergy together. They were discussing who shall be our next bishop. And they were heated arguments. And for days they couldn't come to any agreement. And they began to fight among themselves. And to the point that the magistrate, Ambrose, heard about this. And he took some soldiers with him. And he went into the basilica. And he spoke to these people. And he told them, he says, what a scandal you are giving to the whole city. You know, mainly pagans. And you say we are famous for being a people who love each other. And you are behaving like disgraceful people fighting instead. And they say, can you please calm down and reason and discuss? Let this thing be done in order. And he went on for a while talking to them until from the bottom of the church, somebody shouted, Ambrose, O bishop. And after a few minutes, another voice, until the whole of the congregation there in the basilica, they began shouting, Ambrose, O bishop. And the poor Ambrose was simply a catechumen at the stage. He tried to pull back from that, but at the end, somehow, he felt that he had to listen to what God was saying through all of these people, and he accepted. And so he was baptized very quickly. He became a deacon very quickly, became a priest very quickly. He became a bishop, the greatest bishop that Milan has ever had. Incredible bishop there in Milan. And Milan has had many brilliant bishops, St. Charles Borromeo being one. But Ambrose was, they consider even today the greatest bishop, a powerful orator. You can read his sermons, and they're still incredibly beautiful, Ambrose. And then Ambrose will not allow anyone to form his future priests. He had them in his house, and he formed them, he educated them, love for the scriptures and the holiness of life, and they could see all of this in him. You got that the next one, St. Augustine. Now, St. Augustine was interesting because you see, Augustine, he had, as you know, a bit troubled life for many years, and he had a son, and he had a woman for many years. Then he went into the path of conversion, and he went to Milan at a certain stage, he went to Milan. And when he was in Milan with his mother, Monica, he used to go on Sunday to hear Ambrose preaching. And he was overwhelmed. You see, if in the congregation there was one man capable of assessing how well Ambrose preached, it was Augustine. Because Augustine himself, he was a teacher of rhetoric, which was teaching Roman young people and anywhere in the empire. He was teaching them in Rome, and he was teaching them in Tagaste in Africa. He was teaching them to produce good speeches, good sermons, and for their military or for their political career. And so he was really astonished at the beauty and the power and the learning which was displayed by Ambrose when he was preaching. And so at the point it was that Augustine asked to be seen by Ambrose, and then very shortly afterwards, Ambrose baptized Augustine, and Augustine then went back to Africa, where he became a priest and then a bishop. Now, there is a story you see there. I think all of you recognize it. Augustine, at that time, he was busy writing the book on the Trinity. And he was very troubled because he wanted to explain it better, to understand it better. And then he had, as he was walking by the sea, the shores there, he was walking in meditation and contemplation of the mystery. And all of a sudden he saw this little child there on the beach. And this little child had dug a hole, and then he was rushing to the sea with a little bucket, and he was getting water from the sea and then pouring the water into the hole. Not strange, except that the child kept on going back, filling the bucket, back again to the hole, and pouring the water in, back and forward. After a while, Augustine stopped him and they said, "Little child, what are you doing? What are you doing?" And the little child said, "Well, what I'm doing is, I want to put the whole of the water of the sea into my hole." St. Augustine laughed and they said, "You will never do that. The sea is too big and the hole there on the sand is too small." And the child then answered and told Augustine, "This is what you are trying to do. You're going to put in the small mind of yours the infinite mystery of the Blessed Trinity." And then he soon disappeared. But Augustine got his lesson from that. The third person there you see is John Chrysostom. As I said, he was a splendid preacher, and he himself educated his seminarians, so to speak. Now, we could ask the question, as many does, why, after a glorious period of 6 centuries, he said, did bishops and priests become weak in knowledge and in holiness of life? Rosmini doesn't shy away from confronting the problem. And he was asking why. And he did a very thorough historical research. So he produced a historical study proving that the cause for such a dramatic decline was the constant invasions of barbarian tribes who put to an end the mighty Roman Empire. As you know, the Roman Empire was still strong, and it embraced, if I can go here now, it embraced the whole of the known world in those days. It reached India and part of India, and then the whole of Syria, the whole of Persia, and all of that areas, and then the top of Africa, all of it, and then the whole of Europe, and the whole of the Middle East. All of that was the Roman Empire. And then you see, borders are too long. And therefore, what happened that as soon as barbarian tribes from the east, far east, they began moving forward, attracted by the wealth of this Roman Empire, and then one army after the other one, and they truly invaded the whole of the Roman Empire. The very first invasion, and they reached the city of Rome, was in 410. Augustine was still alive, and Augustine, when he heard about that, he could not believe it. To him it was impossible. And yet he reminded himself of the words in the book of Revelation, fallen, Babylon is fallen, the great Babylon has fallen. And then he wrote in the book, as you know, the city of God and the city of men, and all empires pass away. And so there you got the barbarians there, and the Ostrogoths, they took possession of Italy, Franks, the French, Franks, then the Visigoths of Spain, you got the Celts in Britain, You got the Saxons in the northern part of Germany and in Britain later, the Slavs, Slavonic people, and so forth. And so they invaded and they didn't go back. They established themselves in this country. Now, the people, the barbarian kings, after destroying cities and murdering an endless number of innocent people, settled in the conquered land of Europe, North Africa, Middle East, and feared by everyone. These were really cruel people. And so the people were very attached to their pope, their bishops and priests. They found refuge in them. And so the barbarian rulers, they, in order to control the population, they didn't want trouble. They bestowed the titles and the wealth onto the popes and the bishops. And so what happened is that all throughout those lands, the bishops became very, very wealthy indeed, because the kings, the barbarian kings, they bestowed on them power and wealth and land. And so the bishops became powerful, wealthy, bound to their rulers. They became like princes with their own army and their own fortresses. And it was at this stage that the link with the people and the priests were broken. So the priests, abandoned by their bishops in their spiritual needs, became corrupt, using the priesthood as a means of making money and of achieving some status in life. Rosmini says, what a pity, because in the first 6 centuries, people joined the priesthood very often from a very wealthy background, and just to be poor like Jesus, and to follow him, to follow in his footsteps. Whereas at that time, people joined the priesthood just to make money and for achieving a status in society. So what can you expect then from such bishops and from such priests? So the Council of Trent, many centuries later, tried to stop the corruption of priests by creating seminaries whereby vocations to the priesthood could live in a holy environment with sound teaching and discipline of life. You see, it had gone. The fact of seminarians being formed by their bishop had gone completely, many centuries. So Council of Trent said, let's create seminaries where these young people can go and can be formed by good formators. And so that's what the council did. Now, Blessed Rosmini admitted that it was a great way forward, the seminaries. Unfortunately, the candidates to the priesthood had many books to learn, but it was more erudition than wisdom. They learned their philosophy from manuals and their theology from summaries of very abstract formulas. They were distant from the people, and so they were not formed, but simply informed. That's what Rosmini says. They were not formed, but simply informed, and in a very scholastic way. So there was no heart, no real converting of what was being learned into a holy life. There was a dysfunction between learning and life. That was the strength of the early times, the conjunction between learning and life, but now there is this disjunction or this dysfunction between learning and life. And so the second wound therefore persisted. Inferior textbooks, inferior teachers formed themselves inferior priests. They were in no position to revive the liturgy of the sacraments by making people know and understand the beautiful things that should have warmed the hearts of the faithful. You see, that is the wound. Now, what are your views? You see, I mean, we are on Zoom, so we cannot really enter into great discussions here. I would have been interested at this point to say, what are your views about the priests of today? And are they better educated? Does their life reflect the splendor of what they study? When I mean by better educated, do they truly know this book, the Bible, inside out? Do they know the Bible inside out? Do they truly go into the Bible and study it all the time? Do they know the Father of the Church? Do they know the doctrine of the Church, beginning from the great councils of the early Church all the way up to today? Do they know all of that? And is there holiness in all the learning? Is there education based on scriptures, the fathers, and on sound theology? So if you go back to what Rosmini says, only great people can form great people. What does this say about education at parish or at Catholic schools level? We all remember very good teachers, don't we? If there is a teacher who's outstanding in a school, well, the pupils who listen and follow his lessons, they will become outstanding themselves. If they are very poor teachers, then you cannot blame the pupils for knowing very little. And that school's level, parish level is the same. And therefore, with this expression, only great people can form great people, he embraces everywhere where there is a communication and learning. I mentioned there St. John Marie Vianney. Now, I put him there for a purpose, because St. John Marie Vianney, as you know, he applied to be a priest, but he was rejected over and over again because he wasn't brainy enough. He didn't have enough to pass exams, for example. And therefore, but his holiness was immense. He was a very, very holy young man. And therefore, at the end, one bishop said, I'll give you a chance. And I want you to become a priest. And so he was accepted. And, with great compassion, the bishop made sure that he knew his stuff very well, but he could not doubt whatsoever about the holiness of his life. And eventually became a priest. He became a priest, and he was posted in a small little village called Ars near Lyon. When he was there, the local priests were ashamed of him. And so what they did, they wrote a letter to their bishop, asking the bishop to stop St. John Marie Vianney from preaching, because he was an embarrassment to them. And they thought that his sermons were so poor that, the people would not learn anything, and they would humiliate the other priests as well. Now, this letter was signed by the priests, and by mistake, it was passed on to St. John Marie Vianney. And he read the letter, he signed it with a smile, and then he sent it on to the bishop. And the bishop was clever enough, and he didn't take any notice of it. And within a couple of years, St. John Marie Vianney became the most famous priest in the whole of France. People from Paris were traveling to Ars in Lyon to listen to the sermons of St. John Marie Vianney. And as you know, he is the patron saint of parish priests, of holiness of life. But he put all his effort in learning all that he could. Now, the healing of this wound can only be brought about by the bishops. And it is their duty to form their priests, to be the shepherds of both priests and lay people. So that's what Rosmini says. The bishops have a very special responsibility in forming their priests. Now, unfortunately, says Rosmini, there is a third wound, which is the most serious and the cause of the second wound, and this is the lack of unity among bishops. Bishops say one thing all over the world. They never agree with themselves, certainly at the time of Rosmini, and sometime today especially, we got disunity among bishops. Now, there is division, different positions among bishops. How can they possibly form holy and great priests? How can they possibly form holy and great priests? So Rosmini says, well, we need to heal another wound, which is the third wound of the church. Okay, people, so I would say that we shall stop here. This is within the second wound, and the time has moved on. Let's see what time it's 2:30. No, we still got 10 minutes. Yeah, we might go a little further, and we got time to 3:30, so we got 10 minutes more. Let's begin. The third wound is the lack of unity among the bishops of the church. I don't know if you have followed the news, but in recent times, about 75 bishops, they wrote to the bishops of Germany saying that their views were divided in the church, that no one could agree with them about what they were coming out with. And therefore, the 75 bishops, they felt that they should truly try to get in line with what the other bishops were thinking. The problem is that other bishops in America, for example, they also have very different opinions among themselves. And therefore, there is lack of unity among the bishops of the church. There isn't the traditional bishop, there isn't the liberal bishop, there is bishop who say that all kind of things which we thought to be condemned clearly by the church now are becoming more permissible or acceptable. Other bishops say, no, we cannot go down the road. And so there is this unity among the bishops of the church. Now, this is where perhaps the process of synodality in the church that Pope Francis is implementing at the moment, we see. Rosmini would have been delighted by the idea of synods and the synodality, the view that all baptized people, they have a responsibility in the church. You see, today we are celebrating the feast of Jesus Christ, the eternal priest. Remember, there is only one priest, and this only one priest is Jesus. We all the baptized persons, they share in the one priesthood of Jesus. It is true in various degrees, but they all participate in the priesthood of Jesus. All the baptized are priests, are kings, and are prophets. And therefore we all partake of the same basic entity that we are. And therefore, lay people are themselves indeed, participants to the priesthood of Christ, and therefore they have a great responsibility themselves. Now, the Holy Church was one in mind and heart. The Lord had stressed unity, and especially unity among his disciples. May they be one, was his last prayer. Now, early bishops were one body, governing the church with Peter or his successor. They were all one and insisted all the time about unity among Christians and Christian churches. See, collegiality is the modern term to express that the church is ruled by one body, Pope and bishops together, for the sake of the unity willed by Jesus for his own body, the church. Nowadays, we are using both words, collegiality, and we are using the word synodality as well. Synodality, as we are understanding it today, embraces everyone, embraces the Pope and the bishops and the lay people, the one people of God that is the body, the church. Now, Jesus, before his passion and death, begged the Father to form his apostles into a perfect unity. Unity in the divine nature of the Blessed Trinity is the source of unity within the episcopate of the Church. It's obvious that three persons in the Blessed Unity, in the Blessed Trinity, but there is one God. So unity in the three personhood in God Himself. And so among ourselves, there should be a perfect unity. That is what Jesus insisted. Let them be one. The apostles guarded jealously their unity and the unity of the churches. Plenty of evidence of this Rosmini provides in this book, The Five Wounds of the Church. Rosmini very clearly states that that the Church is one, and therefore read it in The Five Wounds of the Church. He provides plenty of evidence for the amazing things that he used to do in order to keep one. And so the bishop knew one another personally. Titus, Timothy, Polycarp, Ignatius, Irenaeus, John Chrysostom, Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory Nazianzus were bishops who knew personally many other holy bishops, even before they became bishops. They used to visit each other. When they became bishops, they had a problem, and let's go and hear Polycarp, what he has to say. Let us go and hear Clement, what he has to say, and so forth. It was well known that the house of St. Augustine was the house where many future holy bishops were formed. Now, this great bishop formed other great bishops and kept their profound ties of Christian love and friendship. So that is the first point that Rosmini makes, with proofs. Then you got the bishops, even the most isolated, were in constant correspondence, although they lacked the means of communication available to us. It's amazing. St. Paul wrote a letter to the Corinthians, and very quickly the letter was being read all over the Roman Empire because they were so eager to know what Paul had written, and therefore it's been passed on very quickly from place to place. The letters of bishops were read reverently at public assemblies. The apostles wrote letters in the churches, and other fellows, other bishops followed their examples. Clement, Ignatius, Soter, Athanasius, John Chrysostom. Particularly moving are the letters written by Ignatius to the various churches as he was taken to Rome for his martyrdom. He was 8 years old, ill-treated by his guards, but he was writing letters to all the churches that he was passing near and making sure they all got his words. So St. Polycarp, St. Augustine. Now the point is that the bishops visited one another out of mutual charity or from zeal for church affairs. Their devotion embraced the universal church, even more than the particular church entrusted to them. You see, they were conscious of being one body ruling the whole church, not only their own diocese. So they were conscious of being bishops of the Catholic Church, and they realized that one diocese cannot be separated from the entire body of the faithful. Each local church embodied the totality of the reality, which is the church. But their bishops were aware of the fundamental necessity of being one with the other bishops and with the Bishop of Rome. Perhaps this tells you, explains why the host is broken and a tiny fragment is put into the chalice. You know, in ancient time, the host or the bread, consecrated bread, the body of Christ, was being broken. And if somebody there in the community was traveling, let's say, to Antioch, then he would be given a part of this host to take with him reverently to Antioch. And in Antioch, he would present the body of Christ consecrated in Alexandria, they would be taken to Antioch and give it to the bishop there during Mass, just to say the unity which was there between the bishops among themselves. Assemblies and councils, especially provincial councils, were held frequently. Bishops of a province sought each other for advice, for clarifying doctrines, for finding common solutions. The Bishop of Rome was addressed often because the Bishop of Rome always been seen as the seat where the true doctrine actually was. So if there were controversies, let's say, let's go to the Bishop of Rome and see what he tells us about this. And that is the esteem and the reputation that the Bishop of Rome always had from the beginning. Bishops who consult regularly with their priests and with the people, giving them an account of their government. We shall see that when we speak about the money coming into the church. And the bishops say, I'm ready to provide all accounts to priests and to lay people. And they did. They used to do all of that all the time. And people's assent on all matters was valued so highly that if they rejected the bishop, they were not forced to accept him. And another suitable person was appointed in his place. And we shall see again in the fourth wound, where Rosmini claims that people and clergy, they have a divine right to elect a bishop, to elect the bishop by whom they will be ruled. So the people who are ruled, they have the right to accept the shepherd who's going to be their shepherd. And so that was the position during the first 6 centuries. And Rosmini mentions it with great passion, and clearly his hope is that somehow we find a way of getting the clergy and the people involved in all of this. Saint Cyprian wrote to his priest, at the beginning of my episcopacy, I decided not to make any decision without your advice and the assent of the people. So that was the unity among bishops. Now, another point that Rosmini makes, the important bishop of an area, the metropolitan bishop, had authority over the bishops of a province, while the greater sees had the several provinces and metropolitans subject to them. This arrangement provided for uniformity in doctrine and in practice, and strengthened the bonds among churches and bishops. So not separate bishops, but you see the effort that was being made to keep them united, so that the doctrine will be united, so that the moral approaches will be the same everywhere. The overall authority of the Pope, which was the foundational rock of the unity of the universal church, was acknowledged by everyone. Remember that the visitation to Rome, to the Pope, was being done by bishops of an area already from the 2nd century. At the end of the 2nd century, we have evidence that bishops of an area were traveling to Rome in order to tell the Pope what was going on in their area and to ask his advice. So still today we go to what we call ad limina visits, that is the bishop of a nation. They go to see the Pope every few years and they discuss the problems they have with him. And this was all the time at the early time of the church. The Pope was a symbol of unity of the universal church, and bishops made a continuous pilgrimage to Rome to pray over the tomb of St. Peter and St. Paul and to report to the Pope. So the golden year of the church, this golden year came to an end after 6th century. Now, the same destructive force that was responsible for the insufficient education of the clergy was also the cause of the progressive disunion among the bishops. the end of the Roman Empire, and then the Barbarian Kings, who gave so much to bishops and made them into princes rather than shepherds. And therefore, in the crumbling of the old systems, the bishops became the intermediaries between the people and the Barbarian rulers, and they were forced to enter the political arena, acquiring in the process power, wealth, privileges, and separating them from their priests and separating them from their people. And therefore, they became rulers rather than shepherds. Now, this, in a sense, Rosmini says, was willed by Providence because the Christianization of Europe was the result of the presence and influence of bishops and clergy in public administration. However, such involvement brought also evil consequences for the church. The bishops soon learned to love their new political status, surrounded themselves with couriers, armies, and all the externals that they envied in royal princes. They devised protocols, invented titles, built palaces, and generally distanced themselves both from the lower clergy and from the people. Avarice, hatred, disharmony, lust, licentiousness became widespread among them, having been made subservient to the rulers who guaranteed their position. Rosmini wrote, they became slaves of men dressed in soft garments rather than free apostles of a naked Christ. The bishops' political involvement and power was the cause of profound disunion among them. So that's the cause. Now, Rosmini claimed that the Catholic faith might have been saved in some nations if the church had been freed of the wealth that endangered it. But he says, but is it really possible to find an immensely wealthy clergy courageous enough to impoverish itself, or even with enough sense to understand that impoverishing the church is to save the church? So the church longs for freedom, not for wealth, free from all political interference, free from political involvement and wealth. So the bishops, poor and simple like the apostles, would once again become a beacon of communion among themselves and are ready to pursue with vigor the preaching of the kingdom of God to all creatures. This is Rosmini's dream. The all our bishops, they become truly poor and simple like the apostles and totally given to preaching. But you see, to achieve this political disentanglement, the election of bishops must be a matter for the church exclusively. It cannot be achieved unless the fourth wound of the church is first healed. So you see how Rosmini links one wound to the other one. So this is the third wound, the most serious one, but then you got very soon the fourth wound, and that we shall see the next. Now, Pope and Bishop together, they should rule the church. Is this the case today? Well, we are moving a bit more forward towards that, but not sufficiently. Do you feel that the bishops speak with one voice? Well, I wonder. If you read the papers nowadays and see what the bishops do and say in different parts of the world, you see that there is immense disunity among them. Now, the apostles were responsible for the whole church, and they visited each other, wrote to other churches, encouraging them or even taking them to task for failing to comply with the same faith, the same morality. The rich church constantly helped the poor ones. Is there the same sense of universal responsibility? Or is each bishop looking after his own flock only, with little interest about all of the churches? Moreover, I can ask you, is there an involvement of the lay people in the election of the shepherds, of other bishop. And this is interesting. I think it will come. Perhaps the Rosmini's desire about this has not come yet, but now and then you hear some bishop voicing something similar. Archbishop Martini of Milan, he used to say the same as Rosmini said about that. But we shall see that the next final session on the 5 wounds, which will be on the 23rd of June. It's again on a Thursday. It's again at 2:30 in the afternoon, and I hope to see all of you then. Is there any question anyone would like to ask? Any question at all? Thanks a lot, says one Bino. Greetings from Bangalore Scholasticate. The greetings indeed to all of you. And see you next time. Thank you a lot. And okay, so you enjoyed this. And I hope you find it useful in your formation. And I hope to see all of you then again on 23rd of June at the same time. Here in England it's 2:30, but there I think is a different time, maybe evening. Okay, any question? And then we close? No. Okay, thank you to all of you, and bye-bye.